Over the course of the summer, I'm going to be kind of sharing off and on some messages about marriage and family. And I was talking with Matt Hand prior to the service today, and he's asked me, well, what are you preaching on? And I told him, I said, it's not really anything, really theologically, deep or substantive or anything like that. I'm preaching on family. And I told him I was preaching on, the whole one flesh concept. And he kind of rebuked me. He didn't know that's what he was doing. But he said something to the effect, well, I disagree. I think it's very theologically substantive in that Christian marriage is supposed to be a reflection of the Trinity and the unity and harmony and oneness that exists within God himself. So it's a picture of God. It's a picture of the kingdom. It's a picture to the world about, how things are supposed to be. And it's supposed to be an incredible picture of what God is like. And I thought about that, and, he's absolutely right. And so I would change my tune and say, this is a very theologically substantive message. And I know that people who are not married are like, well, I don't know if this is necessarily for me. Well, first of all, if you're a young person, you probably will be married at some point, and it's probably more important for you to pay attention than anybody. But for the rest of us, there's a support factor and an encouragement factor, and also a knowledge factor that goes along with how this does picture the Lord and how God exists, in complete harmony within himself as Trinity, and how God has designed the family to picture that very thing. And it's funny because, yes, the Bible talks about us becoming one flesh, and yet men and women are very different, in case you haven't noticed. Aside from the obvious, men and women, they just think differently. They behave differently. For example, a man will pay $2 for a $1 item that he needs, and a woman will pay $1 for a $2 item that she doesn't need, but buys it anyway because it's on sale. A man has 6 items in his bathroom. He has a toothbrush, toothpaste, a shaving cream, a razor, a comb, and soap. A woman has 337 items. Most of these a man would not be able to identify. Women love cats. Men say they love cats and kick cats when women aren't looking. Oh, come on. A woman marries a man believing that he will change, and he doesn't. And a man marries a woman believing she will never change, and she does. Women know all about their children. They know about their dentist appointments and their allergies and their romantic interests and their hopes and dreams. And men are often just vaguely aware that some short people live in the house. And yet, we're to become one flesh. The Bible talks about this in Genesis 2:24. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the physical union is easy, but how do we accomplish this emotionally or even spiritually when we are so different? We obviously look different, we're wired different, we think different, we behave different, and we often want different things. But I do think there's one thing that men and women do have in common about what they desire, and I would like to think that most people do desire a level of emotional, if not spiritual, intimacy in their relationship with their spouse. They desire that sense of unity and harmony and oneness in their relationship. They desire to be one flesh. But we often look at our relationship and realize that, hey, man, we're not even close. And we have no clue as to how to get there. And so the question of the day is how do we move in that direction? What does this one flesh look like for us, or what are some things that can help us achieve this in our lives? And to answer that question, I want to look at the lives of Aquila and Priscilla in the Bible, because I believe that there are some insights from their relationship that can significantly help us as we strive to become one flesh. And I just want to read some random passages about Aquila and Priscilla, because there's really no one section that's, about them. They're always mentioned in passing, but even then, there's so much that we can glean from them about their relationship. And we'll start in the book of Acts in chapter 18. And we read this: after Athens, Paul went to Corinth. This is where he discovered Aquila, a Jew born in Pontus, and his wife Priscilla. They had just arrived from Italy, part of the general expulsion of the Jews from Rome ordered by Claudius. Paul moved in with them, and they worked together at the common trade of tent making. And then in verses 18 and 19, we read, Paul stayed a while in Corinth, but then it was time for him to take leave of his friends. Saying his goodbyes, he sailed for Syria, Priscilla and Aquila with him. Acts 18:26. He began to speak boldly in the synagogue. When Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they invited him to their home and explained to him the way of God more adequately. And yes, you heard that right. Aquila and Priscilla straightened Paul out about some of his theology. And I also want you to notice something. The very first verse I read, the early verses about Priscilla and Aquila is always mentioned first, because in the scripture, the dominant personality or the leader is typically first. But after the latter part of Acts, Priscilla's always the one who's mentioned first. And it's very consistent, because Priscilla has grown and is very much a spiritual leader, not necessarily in the relationship, although I think that's true, but also out and about in her general ministry. Romans 16, say hello to Priscilla and Aquila. This is Paul writing, who have worked hand in hand with me in serving Jesus. They once put their lives on the line for me, and I'm not the only one grateful to them. All the non-Jewish gatherings of believers also owe them plenty, to say nothing of the church that meets at their house. Romans 16:19, here's back to Aquila and Priscilla. Aquila being first this time. The churches in the province of Asia send you greetings. Aquila and Priscilla greet you warmly in the Lord, and so does the church that meets at their house. 2 Timothy 4:19, Paul's writing to Timothy, greet Priscilla and Aquila and the household of Onesiphorus. So what do we know about Priscilla and Aquila? Well, we know that they were always mentioned together. We know that they were a great team. We know that Paul admired and respected them a great deal. We know that the other believers in the Gentile regions also respected and admired them a great deal. We know they worked as tent makers together. We know they traveled throughout Rome together, or throughout the region together. We know they served in churches, specifically in Rome, Corinth, and Ephesus. We know that their ministry was vital in those areas because Paul said so. We know they risked their lives for the gospel. And we know they were both regarded as leaders. And I think that we can infer from all of these shared experiences and all of these facts that they were very, very close to one another. That Priscilla and Aquila were the ultimate team and embodied very much the sense of unity and oneness and harmony that should exist in Christian marriage. In fact, I believe that they very much embody this idea of the one flesh relationship. And as such, they are people that we ought to not only admire, but that we ought to emulate. And there are some things about their relationship, especially in the context of marriage, that I think would be very helpful for us to emulate if we desire that sense of unity and harmony and oneness in our relationship. And the first thing is that they had a shared faith. They were both passionate about the Lord Jesus. And this was the foundation of their relationship. And this gave them a sense of shared values. You see, our faith is the most personal, private, and fundamental aspect of our personhood. And so how can we be one flesh if we don't embody that reality? How can we have unity if we have greatly divergent values and worldview? And I'm not saying that people of different faiths or different beliefs can't have a good marriage, but, and I believe they can. What I am saying is that it's very, very difficult to achieve a true sense of unity and harmony without a genuine spiritual connection. And I believe we instinctively, or at least a lot of people instinctively understand this. For example, we had a church member many years ago in one of our churches named Natalia. And Natalia was very much in love with Neil, and Neil was in love with her, and they very much wanted to get married and spend the rest of their lives together. The problem was that Neil was a practicing Jew, and Natalia was a committed Christian. And she told him that, look, we're not getting married until you have a personal relationship with Jesus. And Neil was frustrated by this, and actually even offended a little. And he felt like, their love could overcome any religious differences that they had. And so Neil was not going to capitulate. He felt like his faith is part of what made him who he was. And if she could not accept him, faith and all, then maybe this just wasn't going to work out. And so they decided to cool the marriage talk for a while and dialogue and get to know each other spiritually, which included attending one another's houses of worship and reading scriptures together, each other's scriptures, which isn't hard for Natalia because she believes in the Old Testament too. And just having a lot of spiritual dialogue with each other and even with other people, and again, really exploring spirituality together. And as Neil began to go to church and read the New Testament and talk with Natalia and others about Christianity, he began to really resonate with so much of what he was hearing. And he wondered why no one had ever shared any of this information with him before. And as he began to more and more investigate Christianity, he became more and more convinced that Jesus was in fact the Messiah that the Jews had been waiting for all of this time. But he really didn't know exactly what to do with that, and so he sought out a Messianic congregation in New York City where he lived, because he didn't live here. She lived in Cumming, he lived in New York. They met at a third place. A Messianic congregation, for those of you who don't know, are Christians who are also Jewish people and worship Christ in the context also of their Jewish faith. And so Neil went to the Messianic congregation, and man, they just connected all the dots. And that was it for Neil. And he committed his life to Christ. He was baptized, and he began to share his newfound faith with his friends and family, and he was just so excited. Neil was a new man. The best part, though, was his new relationship with Natalia. They began to communicate at a whole other level, a whole other plane, and he even said that their common faith has now enabled them to connect and share an intimacy that he didn't even realize existed until he actually became a Christian. And so, and of course, Natalia's thrilled, Neil is thrilled, and she moves to New York. They get married, join a Messianic congregation, and live happily ever after. The idea being that shared faith brings a sense of shared values, brings a spiritual connection that goes so much deeper than we would otherwise have without that spiritual connection. That a shared faith encourages, if not directly contributes, to a sense of intimacy and harmony and oneness in the relationship. But I do want to give you a caution because I've seen this too. Just because two people both say they're Christian and maybe even go to church together does not necessarily mean that they have a shared faith. Because what we often see, especially in our country, is one spouse may be a committed believer while the other spouse is, well, let's say not so committed and not nearly as serious about their faith. And when that happens, the unifying and relational aspects of faith really aren't there. Because one person believes that Jesus ought to be the center of their lives, and the other one, not so much. One person believes that Jesus needs to be first in the family, and the other one, well, not so much. In fact, most of the time, maybe I need to be first in the family, and the things that we want need to be first in the family. One person believes that worshiping God and pleasing God and living a life that pleases God is important, and the other one only thinks about that maybe when they're sitting in church. One person believes that serving God and being involved in ministry is important, and the other one, I got other things that I need to be doing. One person believes that growing in their faith and growing in a personal relationship with Christ is important, and the other one not so much. And I think you can see that these are radically different values. And when two people live in the same house with these radically different values, it's going to create some tension. And that may lead to maybe even troubles or problems in the relationship and in the home and in the family. And I think, the application here is pretty obvious. I think that if you desire that sense of intimacy and harmony and oneness with your spouse, and I hope you do, I hope you want that kind of life, because that's the kind of life that God created us to have. We're to have a rich and satisfying life, which I believe involves, having a rich and satisfying relationship with your spouse. It's your most important relationship next to your relationship with the Lord. And if you want that, I suggest that, yes, maybe you need to go to church together. And maybe you need to read the Bible together and pray together and talk about spiritual things together and do everything that you can to get on the same page spiritually, because it will not only help your relationship with the Lord, it will help your relationship with one another. There's an analogy that I use when I do premarital counseling when this comes up. And, much of the time when people go through premarital counseling, there's this idea that person A and person B need to get on the same page and grow together, right? And so they're going to grow towards each other. And what I tell them is, there's a third party in your relationship, and that's the Lord. And the Lord's maybe up here, and as you grow both towards the Lord, you actually grow together. And I've never seen a family where the two people are growing spiritually and growing together and are involved in one another's lives where it did not impact their relationship and improve the relationship and make it better. And we see this in the life of Aquila and Priscilla. I mean, they obviously love the Lord. They were passionate about the Lord. And you can just as you read the text and even between the lines, there's something special going on with them. There's something really incredible happening in their relationship, and from everything I can tell, the Lord is the foundation for all of that. And so they had this shared faith. They also shared life together, and I know that's a really nebulous term, and so I'll work to kind of define it with this idea, this point, and then and then really clarified, I hope, with the next one. But what I mean by that is they were a team. They're going in the same direction. They're about the same things. They care about the same things. They love the same things. And in essence, they're one flesh in that they are a unit that has the same goals and, again, the same direction in life. Again, they're always mentioned together. They travel together. They work together. They serve together. And one of the things that I think happens at times when people are growing apart is that they get to the place where they don't even want to spend time together. And that creates kind of a downward cycle. That creates a negative dynamic in their lives. And I had a friend, actually more of an acquaintance, who worked out in his garage every night. We had one project or another. He's never in the house. And on the weekends, he's out hunting, he's out fishing. And I kind of noticed that, he was like never at home or never inside the home. He was home, but he was never inside. And I made an offhanded comment one time like, hey, man, you must really be into all this stuff that you do. And he's like, it's all right. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he said, I do all that because I just don't want to be in the house. I don't want to be in there with my wife. And first of all, I couldn't believe what he was saying. And he was absolutely serious. And if two people are growing apart, like the last thing in the world they need to be is apart, like constantly, all the time. Because again, God gave us our spouse to enrich our lives, to bring a sense of satisfaction and fulfillment and oneness to our lives, again, to model even the relationship that God has with himself, within the Trinity, and developing a rich, satisfying relationship with our spouse is very much a part of that. And if you want to develop that rich, satisfying relationship with your spouse, you have to spend time with your spouse. There's no getting around that. And so really the kind of that first step in growing together and getting in the same direction, getting on the same page and being a team is even just spending time together and not just talking about, who's going to pick up the dry cleaning or who's going to cook dinner tonight, but I mean really getting to know one another. I recommend spending some time every day in a genuine conversation with your spouse. Again, not talking about the dry cleaning or whatever, but, what's going on with you? What happened today in your day? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What's happening? There are other things that you can do to kind of jumpstart that. I recommend every once in a while, and especially if you're in one of those places, maybe you just need to get away. No kids, no cell phones, no schedules, nothing. Just you and your spouse to work on that. Maybe you need a date night and, to keep it sacred. And again, that's really kind of that first step. But there needs to be that shared purpose, that shared direction in life, that team that I think couples often forget about and they often miss, and I think it's greatly to the detriment of their relationship. And I'll use the last point I wanted to make to really kind of illustrate the third point, and that is that Priscilla and Aquila not only shared faith, they not only shared that sense of teamness and sharing life together, but they also shared ministry together. And I think a better way to say that, and I thought about this after I sent the PowerPoint in, but is, they served together. They had the same goals in life. They wanted the same thing, and for them, that was serving the Lord Jesus. And that brought them this tremendous sense of purpose in their lives. Again, let me read some more scripture that in ones we've already read, but But just look at the text. Priscilla and Aquila explained to him the way of God more adequately. Man, what a ministry. Like they're in there mixing it up with the Apostle Paul. They're impacting his ministry and helping him be more effective. Then it's greet the church that meets at their house. They're hosting the church. Everything's, or so much is revolving around them. Say hello to Priscilla and Aquila, who have worked hand in hand with me. Paul even says they once put their lives on the line for me. They saw themselves as a ministry team. They had a common purpose in life, and I guarantee you that brought them closer together and enabled them to grow together. Unfortunately, this doesn't always happen. I'm just going to get real honest with you guys here for a moment. One of the biggest ministry secrets, dark ministry secrets, that people just don't talk about are pastors' wives who are not supportive of their ministry. They did not feel called to ministry. They believe that the church is just their husband's job and are often very bitter and resentful towards the demands of ministry, which at times can become burdensome. And I'm not sure that anyone can deal with unless there is a genuine call in the home. And this can be devastating to pastors' marriages. And it's also very, very common. And there are actually retreat centers all over the country. Every denomination that I know of has them. And they're places where pastors can go, where there are counselors and other professionals on staff to help them, pull their marriage back together. And some of the greatest Christian leaders in history have had this issue and have had to deal with this. For example, William Carey, the founder and pioneer of the Baptist missions movement. He was the first, Baptist missionary, and he was in India. And he felt called to go to India, but his wife Dorothy did not feel called to go to India. She wanted to stay in England where, she had lived all her life. And to be fair, 5 generations of her family had never traveled more than 10 miles from the village in which she grew up. And so she thought her husband's desire to go to India was absolutely insane. And they actually had it all set. He was going to go without her, and she was going to stay in India all the way up until the day that they left. And the only way and the only reason she ended up going was because the boat was delayed. There was some technical issue, and there was like a 4-hour window. And so Carey ran home and made one last desperate attempt to pull his wife into India and to coming to India with him. And she finally acquiesced because he really pressured her, and so she had 1 hour to pack and to mentally prepare herself to go to India, back in a day and time when it's not like just hopping on a plane and where you could just come back. It's not the way that it was. And she wasn't into it. Her heart wasn't in it, and it was devastating. It was devastating for their marriage. It was devastating for their relationship, and it was devastating even for the ministry. When they got to India, they were in a part that was very hot, and so the oppressive heat, the sickness, the poverty, the lack of fruit in the ministry, because Carey didn't bear fruit for many, many years, and then finally the loss of a child just sent her over the edge and into a depression and a funk that lasted the rest of her life. And she spent the final 13 years of her life locked away in a padded room. And this destroyed Carey. He was beside himself, and the heartache and the grief and the pain that brought was almost more than he could bear. And really only by God's grace was he able to press forward and continue his ministry and have the kind of impact that he did. And I say all that to say that, what a tragic thing that is when you have spouses that are just in 2 completely different directions. And I think you can imagine what that did to the relationship and what that did to the marriage. And I think it's tragic because, I have found, and I'm not holding myself up as some kind of an example or necessarily anything like that, but I've just found through personal experience that doing ministry together with your spouse can bring you closer together like nothing else. And, I just happen to have a spouse who I believe is one of the more supportive pastors' wives that I know. I meet with pastors all the time. We hang out and we talk about things and stuff going on in the family. And it's tough. And I hear stuff going on with guys and stuff going on in the home and issues that come from their ministry that, that I just don't have. And, Cindy, I believe, is very supportive of me and the ministry. And not just even in an emotional sense and in an encouraging sense, but over the years, we've done ministry together so many times in so many ways. And, we're very different people. We have very different gifts. Cindy's very much the helps and service gift. She's very creative, and she can do stuff like put a VBS craft together or a whole VBS or paint the children's thing, or, she's administrative, she's organized. She's really good at that stuff. And so it's not like we're doing the exact same things, but we're working towards the same goals. We believe in the same things. We're going in the same direction. And sometimes, actually, she takes the lead, and I support her. Like, for example, we just are getting ready for our big, awesome VBS, the superhero camp, superhero VBS, and we had to prepare some of the crafts, and she couldn't be here this week because her mom's moving in with us. She's moving back here Sunday, and so she's helping her mom move. But Cindy all week, actually for the last month, has been putting that stuff together, and I'm playing a support role. I'm in there cutting out the capes for the superhero costumes, and I can recall so many times, we started 2 churches together and turned around 2 churches together where Cindy's running the VBS. She's running the children's ministry. She's organizing the office, and I'm the one taking orders, not her. But over the years, as we've seen churches started, and as we've seen people come to Christ, and we've seen stuff happen, we share in that victory. We share in the fruit of that ministry, and it really has given us a sense of intimacy and unity in our relationship that I do not believe would be there otherwise. And, when we're together and we're hanging around socially with other people, we kid around a lot, and when people get to know us, we've had the comment frequently, like, we cannot believe, like, how much you guys talk. Like, just the connection that you have. And in every sense of the word, she's my best friend, and I believe that I'm her best friend. And that is something that has built over the years more and more so because of that shared goal, that shared purpose, that shared vision. And in serving together, it has given us a greater purpose than ourselves and even our family, and it's something that our whole family is able to move towards. That, if it was just about us, and, if I wasn't in ministry or wasn't a Christian, I don't think we'd be anywhere close to that. I know that's not the big, exciting illustration, the cool story that makes people cry or laugh or that sort of thing, but it's just my own experience in knowing that when you serve the Lord together and you're both on the same page about what your family's about and about what the foundation of your family is and the direction of your family, there's a unifying element to that. And I believe that's the Holy Spirit, working in your life and working in your family. And so, as you read about Aquila and Priscilla, and you look at their relationship, and you see something there that's attractive, and you see that richness and that togetherness, that unity, that harmony, that oneness, and you think, man, that's something I think that would be really, really great. Then I would say just, not only admire them, but emulate them. Build your relationship on the foundation of Christ and get your life on the same page together, moving in the same direction, that you guys are a team. Again, you're going to have different gifts, you're going to have different things that you're about, but you want the same things, and you have the same heart, the same passion about your life. And then you support one another and encourage one another as you serve together. And there's unifying stuff going on there that certainly worked for Aquila and Priscilla. I'm not saying that Cindy and I are on that level, because I don't think that we are and would never claim that. But some of those are the same things that we found to be so significant in our own relationship. And I see it over and over and over again, even with many families, even in our church, where we have, people that just support each other as they serve the Lord and build up the church and try to build up God's kingdom together. And it's really special stuff. And so, yes, we're very, very different. Men and women, men are from Mars, women from Venus, well, all that stuff, cats and dogs. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. We're very, very different. But there's unifying spiritual things that if we can connect on, make all the difference in your relationship. And that is where it causes the two things that actually are so different become and complement one another as the Lord uses you as a team and grows you together as a team for Him and for His kingdom and for your family.